yeah, the title that's on the program is Considering the Spring Arbor Concept Today. My name is Dr. Garnet Hauger. This is my lovely husband over here. I'll get it. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to turn this. Yeah, I hope that'll make it better for the audience to see at least. Okay. Yes, so let's go down here. Here's my title slide. I'm talking about the Christian perspective in the liberal arts, a phrase that's been around since before 1873, of the founding of Spring Arbor Seminary, which was another name for high school, although it also had a grade school. This is a phrase that's pretty important here. Of course, there's the Spring Arbor concept, and I'm challenging us to think about a time for renewal. So let me just give you an outline of what this talk is about. First of all, I want to talk about the history of a Christian perspective in education from the Wesleyan Free Methodist perspectives, long tradition of that, the development of the Spring Arbor concept in the 1960s, what are the liberal arts and why should I care? What does total commitment to Jesus Christ as our perspective for learning mean? What does a curriculum look like that supports this? What are some faculty efforts at integration of faith, living, and learning? And where do we go from here? Are we at a crossroads? And my answer is, I think we are. Okay, so let's talk about some important people in the Wesleyan Free Methodist tradition whose words have helped make us what we are today. The information on this slide and the next several slides is taken from this book, A Concept to Keep, was edited by Dr. Gail Beebe, who was the president at that time, and John Calaga, who was a dean, and it was published in 2003. And it's a wonderful history of this whole idea about where a Christian perspective in education came from. So I'm going to go through some of those, not all of them. First of all, there's John Wesley. I'm assuming most of you have heard of John and Charles Wesley. So John Wesley, in the chapter in the book called A Concept of Truth, said, all knowledge is to be brought under the examining light of Scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. Now, you don't have to be on this campus long enough to know we call that the Wesleyan Quadrilateral. It's on the tower. If you walk around the tower, you're going to see those words, important words in the Wesleyan tradition, and also for Christian education. What I want to focus on is the first part of that sentence, all knowledge, meaning, I don't care where you find the knowledge. You might find it in math, you might find it in art, you might find it in social studies, you might find it in psychology. Wherever you find it is to be brought under the examining light of Scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. Another important person, sorry the print's so small here, but Benjamin T. Roberts, who is the founder of the Free Methodist Church, also thought about what it means for Christian higher education. He advocated that young ministers commit to the discipline of study, a broad and liberally based education, and its practical application to the affairs of everyday life. Knowledge of science, history, and oratory, I think that's communication by speech and so forth, without the Spirit may make one an amusing speaker, but such a person will not be able to convict men of sin or awaken the conscience. So he's implying here that you have to collect this knowledge because there's some important kingdom purpose. Human learning aids greatly in understanding the Scriptures to have a knowledge of natural science. History should also be studied. It doesn't leave anything uncovered, does it? The hand of God can be seen in the history of our race. Literature, mathematics, and in short, every branch of human knowledge can be used to advantage in the work of winning souls to God. So he's marrying a liberal arts education to our kingdom purpose. I think that's kind of challenging and important. Some more important people. Edward Payne Hart, founder of Spring Arbor Seminary and High School. When I first came here, the chapel, which is not the same white auditorium we have now, it was E.P. White Auditorium. And then that was renovated to become White Auditorium, but it was a nod to our founder. the original chapel was named after him. And he wanted to establish a school to develop young people with strong and vigorous Christian characters with which to go forth wisely and successfully to meet and solve the problems of life, and so to prove a blessing to their generation. These are pretty goosebumpy words, I think. Then I switched over to this book, 100 Years at Spring Arbor, written by Howard Snyder. He's big in Free Methodism. Because he also has, and you cannot read very many pages of this book before you see the phrase Christian perspective in the liberal arts, or Christian perspective for education. So I didn't want to highlight all the people in here who said that, but I wanted to pick on Merlin Smith. He was the president of Spring Arbor High School from 1926 to 1934, just before Spring Arbor became a junior college. His philosophy of education is, what makes education Christian is not the matter of the addition of religious content, but rather it is a matter of bringing to the educational process a uniquely Christian perspective, whatever that might mean. We've been fighting about that for 50 years since I've been here. What does Christian perspective mean? Smith makes it clear that truth in whatever field it may be found should be integral to Christian education. So it's not hard to see in the writings of these four men, and there are more of them who are highlighted in these books, the heart of what eventually became the Spring Arbor concept, with a concern that education be liberal and broad, with the view of its applicability in everyday life and for the building of the kingdom of God. Then comes along David McKenna. He was the president of Spring Arbor College. By that time it was a junior college, 1961 to 1968, and he's the one who led the effort to us becoming a four-year college. He wrote 4 monographs which formed the basis of education at Spring Arbor College. When I arrived on this campus in the fall of 1971, I was handed copies of these 4 monographs. I don't know where the first one went to, but I've got the other 3 still in my files. So he had 4 monographs, lengthy papers. The first one had to do with change of parish. The 1960s was, well, none of you, very few of us were around then, but it was a pretty chaotic time in American culture and in education. And so we were wondering about what's the survival rate for Christian colleges? What do they have to become to survive? So he was highlighting the need for an undergraduate liberal education within the Christian tradition. He talked about what are some alternatives for action in the second monograph. He outlined 5 plans for the small church college. First of all, importantly, an integrated sense of institutional purpose, selective admission of students, a continuing plan for curriculum development. If we know anything about Spring Arbor University, we know that we're always updating courses, changing the curriculum, doing away with this course, adding a new course. So we're living up to that. Emphasis on teaching as the primary function. Yes, there are some faculty who are very good at doing research, but that doesn't lower their teaching, though. We emphasize the need to teach. An integrated program for the analysis, discussion, and choice of value positions. This will mean a reaffirmation of the Christian tradition and restoration of liberal education. Then his next monograph, Christ and the College, the person and work of Jesus Christ provide the basis for defining the evangelical Christian college. When I first came here on campus and I heard Dr. Darrell Moore, who is the father of Dr. Kimberly Moore Jumonville, he spoke at the beginning session of school, and he talked about what makes Spring Arbor College an evangelical Christian college. Now, I didn't realize that these words on this slide didn't come from him originally, but came from David McKenna. So they're important words. It's a college because its primary interest is given to the process of involvement in and appreciation for the life of learning. It's a Christian college because the prerequisite for purposeful involvement in the life of learning is commitment to the redemptive power of Jesus Christ. It's an evangelical Christian college because its end and purpose is to accomplish sanctified participation in the affairs of life through Christian vocation and social responsibility. Again, you cannot read this without saying, oh, the Spring Arbor concept is right there.
Do you have a slide of the Spring Arbor concept?
It's coming up there. Hang on. Here, there's also a nice chart in, I think it's in this book, and I pared it down, but McKenna likes to connect our work as a college, which is over here, to the work of Christ, the creative work, the redemptive work, the sanctity work. And he has here, reason is a gift from God. Love is the highest order of integration in human experience. Will is the action point for decision responsibility, and here we go. Involvement in a community of scholars who investigate areas of knowledge from a Christian worldview. Commitment to Jesus Christ as the perspective for freeing the mind and integrating learning. And participation in the social order with the preparation and responsibility for Christian vocation. Again, strong hints for what's about to come. The fourth monograph that McKenna wrote was, we need to think about a commitment that is unique to this point of view. Curriculum for commitment. Christian higher education is a process of involvement in a community of scholars who investigate the areas of human knowledge from the perspective of a Christian worldview, with an end result of commitment to the redeeming love of Jesus Christ, so that knowledge gained may be integrated by the Christian commitment, and so that students will align themselves with ongoing responsibility of the Christian in modern society, and with an active sense of responsibility for his or her Christian vocation, whatever that may be. Then comes along Dr. Gail Beebe. He was the president of Spring Arbor University, a college, and then he led the transition to university, 2000 to 2007. Again, in this book, he's outlining the 4 parts of the SAU concept. And we're going to get to a formal statement of the concept in a minute, but here's the preliminary work. We are a community of learners. Faculty and staff are closely involved in the lives of the students. And additionally, our programs are designed not only to prepare one for a meaningful career, but also to provide a learning community that shapes one's spiritual, moral, and intellectual life. How about a study of the liberal arts? Now, he gives, on pages 179 to 184 in this book, he gives a bit of a detailed history of what do we mean by the liberal arts. I've outlined the important parts that I want to emphasize here. First of all, in Christian history, and I'm not real sure where this occurred. I don't know if it was 1200s or Middle Ages or before that even. Liberal arts meant language skills, math skills, nature of ethics, proper role of politics, and how to subjugate your unruly passions, as well as a proper study of God. That was the concept from Christian history. I don't remember who he was quoting there. Augustine maybe, I'm not sure. But when I came here, we were advised to think about the trivium and the quadrivium. This also comes from the ancient world up through the medieval period. The trivium were the verbal arts, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. You need to be able to make an argument, you need to be able to speak about it, and you need to use correct grammar as much as possible. The quadrivium, this is the part I like, the mathematical arts, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. This was the heart of the liberal arts at that time. More about the liberal arts. The philosophic arts, this would be the time of Plato, where the idea was to learn to engage in philosophic thought. The highest goal of humans in education is to train one's mind in particular subjects in order to transfer this intellectual training to address the great questions of life. That sounds kind of important. And then the practical arts in the time of Cicero, who said, learning how to communicate effectively in order to apply this knowledge in the service of civic life. Learning must go beyond mere acquisition of knowledge. It must go to the very heart and needs of one's society. And then the productive arts. The Christian church emphasized industrious intelligence. This is about 1100 AD. The productive hearts help lead us to God, since they require a training and discipline that focuses our mind and controls our passions. Thus, the productive arts teach us to love God, to discipline the self, and to gain mastery of particular skills so that we can make a creative contribution to God's will for our world. Here's a modern view of the liberal arts. This is the Hauger version. No, it's not in any of these books, but it's in my heart, and I must share it with you. Hauger version of liberal arts. Every academic discipline we see in every college and university studies something about God's creation, whether it be human behavior, individual or group, or natural and physical aspects of the world, or the creative dimensions of art, music, and literature. Each of these areas of study say something about God's creation and our place in that creation, by the way. And thus they reveal aspects of God, and for that reason they are worthy of study. I'm going to put that, you can't get all that on a t-shirt, but maybe a plaque, I don't know. Anyway. Okay, parts 3 and 4 of the SAU concept. So the first part was community of learners. Second part was a commitment to a serious study of the liberal arts. And then parts 3 and 4, total commitment to Jesus Christ as our perspective for learning. We have struggled with what in the world does this mean? Focus our attention on learning the way in which every area of knowledge reveals God's will for the world. That's quoting from BB. Critical participation in the world. This is the fourth part of the concept. In different spheres, and Dr. Beebe outlined these different spheres. I hadn't thought about it, thinking about it that way. But he said, well, we've got the social setting, environmental conditions and institutional structures, economics, political dimension, religious sphere, how culture defines and responds to deviance, cultural sub-themes like art, education, entertainment, and leisure, the role of the military and police, coordination and supervision between judicial and legal institutions. So he's giving us some specifics about what being involved in the world might look like.
He left out the sciences.
Well, yes, he did, and I'm going to forgive him for that because he really was a pretty good guy. Okay. All right, here we go. Review of SAU's curriculum to support the Spring Arbor concept in the 1960s. Well, let's finally have a statement of the Spring Arbor concept. We should say this all together. Come on, we can do it. Spring Arbor University is a community of learners distinguished by our involvement in the study and application of the liberal arts, total commitment to Jesus Christ as a perspective for learning, and critical participation in the contemporary world. You don't get goosebumps, you must have been dead for 6 months or longer. Okay.
Was the word lifelong added later?
Maybe I left that out, but it should be lifelong involvement, absolutely. There's room here. I could just put that right in there, couldn't I? Very good, yes. I think that belongs in there. It's been tweaked over the years, so. Okay, now in the 1960s, we have a bunch of creative faculty here who said, what would a curriculum look like that would support this concept? And they came up with a general education curriculum that consisted of 8 courses. Here are the titles of those courses: God and Man, Concepts and Values, Freedom and Order, Mind and Motivation, Image and Idea, Thought and Symbol, Structure and System, and Energy and Matter. Not hard to see that the first 2 courses come from philosophy and religion. The next 2 courses come from the social sciences, Freedom and Order, and Mind and Motivation. The next 2 courses, Image and Idea and Thought and Symbol, come from the humanities. And the last 2, Structure and System, Energy and Matter, come from the sciences. Okay? This was a brilliant idea. So these 8 courses placed primary emphasis on integration of faith, living, and learning. That was their task. Don't just talk about the subject matter. Think about what it means for integration of faith, living, and learning. But then they did some other things too. A number of other courses considered to be core to what SAC was about were also introduced with a focus on integration of faith, living, and learning. 2 courses, Christian Perspective Foundations 1 and 2. And from the catalog descriptions, it appears that they emphasize themes from the Old and New Testament. So that was added to the curriculum. And then in the 1970s and 1980s, the first year I was here, there was a week-long workshop in the middle of the school year on revamping the curriculum. So sometime in the 1970s, those 8 unique Gen Ed courses were replaced. They didn't transfer well, and when students transferred in, we didn't know what to, it was a great idea. It's just that it didn't work so well. They were replaced with what we have now, more a cafeteria approach to general education. We call them bank courses. Roger, do you remember us calling them bank courses?
Oh, certainly.
Oh gosh, yes. Similar to what we have now, though it's been tweaked quite a bit over the years, even recently. Basically, in each category of the liberal arts, students can choose which course to take so that it complements their program or their interests. The Christian Perspective courses were expanded initially into 3 courses identified as Christian Perspective Core, CPLA 210, the Christian Faith Biblical Foundations, CPLA 200, the Christian Faith Living Issues, and CPLA 400, the Christian in the Contemporary World. So we were concerned about that. We left CPLA to emphasize Christian perspective in the liberal arts, but later those got changed to Core, and expanded. Core 100, Discovery in the Liberal Arts through a community of learners. Core 200, Involvement in the Christian Faith, Issues and Cultures. The cross-cultural one, Critical Participation in the Contemporary World outside one's own culture. Core 300, Discovering the Christian Faith, its practices through Jesus Christ as the perspective for learning. And Core 400, the Christian in the Contemporary World. You don't have to look at these titles very long before you say, oh, we're being smacked right in the face with the Spring Arbor concept. Those courses are core to what we do here. Okay, then later, I think primarily in the 80s, faculty efforts to integrate faith, living, and learning, we had some serious conversations about what does this integration thing really mean? And during this time, faculty were encouraged. I was encouraged even before this. When I first came here as a young faculty member, George Klein and Denny Garn pulled me aside and said, you gotta write a Christian perspective paper. That's expected of all faculty. So we want you to challenge you to do that. So sometime before 1977, I had written one and it became published. Don't ask me why. But there was a group called Christian Mathematicians and they were anxious to get their hands on papers. And I wrote one. I've written several. And when I looked in my file preparing for this talk, I go, oh my goodness, I never finished that one. Oh, look at this one. Okay, so anyway. So yeah, a number of faculty took this quite seriously, and when you look at their syllabi, you begin to see some of that work here. Biology 281, environmental science. Christian faith is encountered during the first class session when a biblical basis for environmental stewardship is described. Applications of Christian principles are applied to various topics like world hunger, population, and endangered species. Also examine the work of Christian environment missions projects, where part of their ministry is to improve the environment. How about Psych 100? A large percentage of the subject matter here is directly relevant to the Christian faith by using psychology in Christian perspective. It's still available, by the way. Go to Amazon, you can get it real cheap, $3.49, something like that. And weekly discussion sessions are used to cover topics like cognitive development, its relation to spiritual growth, Christian versus non-Christian psychotherapy, and mental illness and sin. Talking about Psych 100, Dr. Terry Darling's father, who also taught here, Dr. Harold Darling, wrote a book. I think it came out about the time that I came to Spring Arbor in 71, wrote a book called Man in His Right Mind, and it got a different title later on, but it was his attempt to integrate his psychology with the Christian faith, and it was a wonderful effort. He challenged others to write books too. Oh, photography. Okay, Roger, I just
Uh-oh.
lifted this right up your sleeve. One of the major assignments is to take a Christian photograph. The students are intentionally given little direction and are expected to wrestle with how to define the terms. The critique after the photographs have been submitted helps students better understand whether Christian is a noun or an adjective and how to better integrate a Christian viewpoint into their artistic work. And finally, here's another one. English 112, Literature, Discovery, and Analysis. A Christian worldview is used as the benchmark for literary analysis of text read and is directly encountered in the writings of Augustine, Dante, Chaucer, and Milton. Students are encouraged to conduct a comparison between classical heroes and biblical heroes for the required compare-contrast paper. And then in the 1990s and early 2000s, Dr. Beebe encouraged us, look, we've got to put some down on, we've got to write some books, we've got to put this down on paper. A lot of the Christian colleges were writing books, putting out information on what it meant to integrate faith, living, and learning. So we weren't alone in that market, but we decided to start putting together some concept books. We would review the history of the development of the Spring Arbor concept. That was the first book. And then the second and third books were written primarily by faculty who were trying to write what does a Christian perspective look like in my discipline. This is supposedly the link to in the library. I couldn't get it to work the last 2 or 3 days, so just go to the library and throw yourself on the counter. They'll find the books there. I want to give you the names of people who wrote in the second concept book, Keeping the Concept. These are mostly faculty. There are some administrators, but mostly faculty from different disciplines. You can see physics, you can see communication, you can see chemistry. David Hopper was in education. Bruce Brown was in music. Chuck Campbell was in philosophy. Terry Darling in psychology. So we were challenged to think seriously about what this means, what the integration of faith and learning looks like. Here's the third book, titled The Concept and the Sciences. So this is primarily social, natural, and physical sciences. Let's see. These are really nice to read. I just recently read Jan Yeaman's book in psychology. She does a nice job of writing about integration of faith and learning in psychology. Okay, so where to now? I believe it's been almost 20 years since we began to write these 3 books. And a couple years ago, there was an effort to start another concept book. It didn't go very far, but it needs to go somewhere. And so I'm throwing out the gauntlet of challenge, that it's now time for faculty and others to think about what Christian perspective in the liberal arts means, to write some papers so that we can put together, we've got newer faculty. Most of these people are gone. They've moved on, they've retired. Hardly any, almost all those people are gone. Almost all those people are gone. We have new, talented, energetic faculty who I don't think have been properly challenged to think about what does Christian perspective in the liberal arts mean in their discipline. And I think it's time for us to have a serious conversation about that. It's now time to have a serious effort at this. And if I understand it correctly, there are plans in the works for a new concept book. And I'm hoping that we will have faculty contributions to that book so that we can think anew about what the Spring Arbor concept means and Christian perspective in the liberal arts. I think that's it from me. Oh, here's a bibliography. I always have a bibliography. Do not look at the citations very closely. It's kind of a combination of Hauger, PLA. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to end that slideshow. This is an opportunity for you to ask questions, make comments. If you want, I'm looking at my 2 students here, if you want copies of the slides, I can send them to you, if that helps you. Questions, comments?
Well, I'll jump in.
Good.
Dr. David McKenna approached us a little over a year ago, actually, and said, as part of the 150th anniversary of the school in '23, I encourage you to come up with a book. And so we had a little bit of wheel spinning as to what we wanted to do with that book. Our basic premise was Christian higher education is distinctive. And we are in a time in higher education when people are trying to figure out what college is for and why there is this concept of a university bringing things together and what is the Christian history of that. We didn't get a lot of takers to participate in that project. So we have decided to look again at the concept for the 21st century. And actually, I'm in the process of going around talking with people about that. And in particular, we're examining each of the key words. What does community mean when the majority of our students are online, for example? I was struck by, I guess it was Bibi's comment that, or someone that you had up there, that community is faculty involvement in the lives of our students. Is that a sufficient definition? Because on campus we have a lot of discussion about how the community here on campus feels. That's a significant part of it. When we talk about learners, who are our learners? We have the traditional students. We have a lot of adult students. We now have a doctorate program. We are, at some point, we actually launched a program in prisons. We were shut down legislatively for that, but now colleges are able to do that again. We are exploring that. What does it mean if our learners are prisoners? And how do we best meet the needs of those learners? And you know better than I that the expectations of students have changed over the years. And how do we meet those expectations and needs? So then we go to the liberal arts. A critical word in there is study and application of the liberal arts. So you had a lot of citations talking about how our learning should be applicable in the real world, but of course there's an ongoing discussion as to the extent to which applied liberal arts are really liberal arts.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, when all of this was going on, we didn't question that education was an appropriate effort for a liberal arts college, but education itself is an applied liberal arts. And so there's a concern, some people have expressed, about nursing. Nursing is an applied liberal arts. Engineering, now that's getting through vocational now, and people are getting nervous. But we need to talk about what is involved in that. And for example, we need to re-examine what the liberal arts means in the 21st century. You know, as you know, the history of that is it starts out, the trivium was because the term liberal arts related to free citizens in a society in which 99% of the people were slaves.
Yeah.
So if you were a free citizen, you had the responsibility to run the place. So the liberal arts were things that free citizens needed to know in order to run the place.
Yeah.
And because in the ancient world, the way you did that was by persuading people. The trivium was basically how to persuade people. So in that, if you think about it, you've got literature and oratory and so on, but you also have society and politics are all embedded in that. Then when we get to the quadrivium with mathematics, you know, arithmetic is mathematics itself, geometry is mathematics in space, but that also includes any three-dimensional kind of application, engineering, even the dimensional arts could be in there. The next one is mathematics in time, which is music, but I would argue that a lot of computer science today is mathematics in time. And then finally we have mathematics in space and time, which is astronomy, which is actually the basis of observational science, right there. So the liberal arts, as we understand it, is really very broad, But I think the more important thing is, remember how it started? It was to give free people the skills to run their lives in the place. That's what the liberal arts are about. And I think of them as the liberating arts. And the reason we want to make sure that people are exposed to the whole range is so you don't become what our president has called a one-pony horse, by which he means the old statement, a one-trick pony, which is you only know one thing. So if you discover, I don't know, you hate accounting, do you have the skills to apply your education in a different arena? And if you've only been trained in one area, you don't have that latitude, you don't have that freedom. So that's part of what we're trying to do, but also it's just the whole, what we're doing in focus is to say that so many disciplines speak into every problem we're dealing with today. And you can't just look, there's another old saying that if all you have is a hammer, you think every problem is a nail. And we want to make sure you've got a full toolkit so you know how to approach problems. So that's the whole discussion of what the liberal arts means. Then we have Jesus Christ as critically the perspective for learning. I have great respect for the history behind the term integration of faith and learning, but I kind of like permeation of learning by the faith. Because if we look at each of our disciplines and we really look into them, we discover that it's Christian understandings of the world that animate so much of that. I mean, take something simple like history. God reveals himself in history, so history is important. He says he can be known through what he's created, and therefore the sciences are important. And if you go back early in Genesis, he lists all these occupations that people have. So all of our vocational callings are important. We have a board member who's stated who is a research scientist in medications, who has said he felt very strongly that his calling as a Christian was to participate in healing. So the vocation doesn't necessarily have to be traditional religious, but that gets us all the way down to critical participation. But what drives all of this is that God has created, and Jesus is creating his kingdom through us. And how do we take our learning from that perspective and apply it? And that's where we get down to critical participants. Critical participants is not merely that you're successful in your vocation, but as Brent likes to say, our president, that if you are successful in your vocation, it gives you a platform to talk about the faith. And this is particularly important in a world that doesn't see the value and has boxed religion increasingly off in a small little area over here. And life is not religious. Religious is this extra thing over here. And in fact, what we want to say is no, just as Christ permeates all learning, his truth permeates all of life. So how do we ensure, one, that we have that platform, and two, that we have the skills to articulate that in a way, all the way back to the beginning of the liberal arts, that is persuasive, and it changes society and brings it along. So that's kind of a sense of the book. And what we want to do is to garner as much wisdom from within our community as possible, not only in articulating in sort of philosophical narrative sense, but also anybody who knows a wonderful example, okay, like the board member I was talking about, what critical participation is, or a wonderful example of the liberal arts expressing Christ. And those we're looking for stories, we're looking for wisdom, and we're going to try to pull the whole thing together in the next year.
Good.
So that's my pitch. Yep. Anybody, particularly including students, who has something, when you think about what the concept is, what does it mean to you, and what do you want it to be, what do you want Spring Arbor to be? This is our mission statement, and I've gone to enough accreditation meetings where they have workshops on revamping your mission statement. And there are schools that revamp their mission statement every couple of years. And so I stood up and said, well, we've had ours for more than 50 years. And they say, well, then it really needs to be changed. And I give the concept to them and they pause and say, oh, that works.
That works.
That works. So how do we make that work in the 21st century for the future of Spring Arbor University and the kingdom?
You.
Thank you.
I can never pronounce your name right, so I believe you try.
First, I want to say thank you for the presentation. And thank you also to Kimberly Hoover for, I don't know, is it a response or whatever?
I'm following your thought.
It is very helpful for me as someone who has been here only about 11 years to hear all of this. I would say as part of this effort for the 150th anniversary, it may be good to have a panel of people coming together. Roger is here, Kimberly, or Hauger over there, just so that people know this history, that we are aware of what has been done, where we have been, where we are today, because I have a feeling that more and more SAU is not clear on who we are and where we should be going. And I think looking back into our history will help a lot, especially those of us who came much later. We don't have to keep everything, as you said. Things are changing. It's not just the Christian aspect, the liberal arts debate. The whole concept of the university has evolved. And parents and families and the culture are approaching things differently. So maybe this is really a time for us to pause and look back and understand the present so that we can see what the future might look like. I just want to put this plea out there that it is really vital for, in my understanding, for who we are in the future of this university. Thank you.
Mr. Hall.
I would like to, I'm retired from Consumers Energy, and when I went to work at Consumers Energy in 1971, I'd never heard of Spring Arbor University or Spring Arbor College at that time. And I remember that people who came to work at Spring Arbor, or at Consumers Energy, usually were from major universities or other colleges. Once in a while you would find someone from Spring Arbor College, but the college at that time was kind of sidelined from consumers' point of view. However, our daughter went here and got her degree in sociology and was hired into Consumers at the time. They were just getting into electronic funds transfer. And that has so little to do with sociology, but she adapted very easily to what was needed and did a good job. And now she's a manager at Consumers Energy and will hopefully retire in about 3 years. She's done really well. And in that time, the value of the Spring Arbor University degree has really escalated and is now well respected because people have come into the workplace as consumers and have done exceptionally well in almost any area they've been hired into. Our granddaughter got her bachelor's and master's degree here and was hired as a middle school counselor. And the summer, or the end of the summer, when she went to work at Woodhaven School over in Woodhaven area, they had 2 students commit suicide over the summer. And so when she came in to work there, that was one of the first things they were going to have to address. And fortunately, they had some other counselors working there that she was able to kind of work with and see how that was done. And so I asked her some time ago, do you pray for your students? And she says, oh, yes. And I was so glad to hear that because they've had some very tragic events happen, other suicides and other events with parents and that sort of thing, that has been very challenging. And to me, it seems like, where would you start with something like that? But she uses her education and the things that she has learned how to apply to the real world to take care of things like that. And where you were just saying, the concept, I think, could also be helped by taking the perspective of people in the world now who have graduated from here and asking them, how did this all help you in your career? Because it did, and it's doing it right now. I'm very proud of Spring Arbor University, and especially proud of Dr. Garnet Hauger.
You forgot to say that Betsy was the Michigan School Counselor of the Year last year.
Not that I want to brag or anything.
Yes.
So I just wanted to mention how specifically I think the community of learners portion of the concept has made a difference in my life. I was a freshman in 2013, and I've been trying to, I went straight through my junior year, and since then I've gotten sick several times, and I've had to withdraw several times, and so I'm still trying to get my degree. Hopefully I'll graduate next year. But anyway, at one point, I actually gave up on graduating from SAU. I thought, this is never going to happen, it's too hard. And I remember just crying my eyes out in Kim Hayworth's office when I went to say goodbye to her. And even though I've had to withdraw several times, I decided to come back yet again. And every time I've been welcomed back with open arms. I've had people support me not just when I've come back, but all throughout my whole time here. And when I was in high school, I was really struggling to decide between SAU and IU, but I decided on SAU, and I've never once regretted my decision.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rajay.
I'd like to build on a little bit what Elise said about, kind of reclarifying our direction, our mission. By looking back, I came in '81, and so the school was still pretty young. It was a 4-year school, about 15 years old, and I was warmly embraced by a bunch of looking now, fairly young faculty, because there had been a big hiring surge in the 70s as the school had grown, and they were pretty energetic about what they were doing. Klein and Garn and Bippus and Bauman and, young radicals maybe, but I had a sense, and over time, then getting to know the previous generation, the old timers who had been here back in the JC days, that, in particular, a lot of the alumni from them over the years now, the Lloyd Ganton generation, who really, this place became their anchor in the 50s as students. But that was the JC years. Then morphing or transitioning into a 4-year school really was, in a sense, building on the past, but also setting a new direction. And that's why I think the concept was so important. It wasn't just saying, well, we're going to keep doing what we were doing, but we're going to be 4 years. I think it was really an attempt to break, and I've often thought, I'd like to dig a little further, why the term liberal arts was included. You would think, well, isn't that just assumed? That's what college is about. But I think there was an attempt to really stake down and say, hey, we're going to get serious about, college level learning, which means digging into the liberal arts, not just kind of doing what we were doing before, which I sensed, yes, there was, liberal arts here in the 2-year school, but it was kind of more general education notion. So the mission was really redefined at that point. Now that we have become a university, I think it really does, not throwing out the concept, but it's kind of like when you do a major overhaul on an aircraft, you kind of have to strip off a lot of stuff, get down to the the structure, examine it, and then kind of, okay, here's the new aircraft ready to go with the new engines, but it's still a plane, you know, and we're still flying and doing those sorts of things. So, not to throw it out, but there are unique situations. You mentioned the community issue. That has been completely upended since the 80s when I came. 80s were here, you live with the people you go to school with, your friends are here. In a sense, it is a little bit more of a bubble. We're face to face, we're doing life together. And now in the online age and we're, you know, scattered, it's a different definition. And so I think we have to come to terms with that and make sure we know where we're going. And that's hard sometimes when probably the last, you know, handful of years felt like we're in survival mode, just trying to figure out how do we get to the next year. But in order to have a future, we really have to have a clear sense of mission. So.
Okay, anyone else? These are good comments.
In other words, for the students, we're trying to make sure that this is the right place for you
Yeah.
and for future generations of students. That we're doing what needs to be done.
Yes, Victor.
So, thank you, Dr. Garnet. It's been only 2 years. I'm a professor in engineering. So sometimes when I talk to people, I teach engineering at Spring Arbor. People might think it's a liberal arts college, and how come you are connecting there, and how come you are working there? So whatever you were saying, I can believe was making sense. Engineering is nothing. It's an art of application of maths, and also it's a field of liberating. So as you can see, the engineers are the one leading the innovations world. So in a way, I would like to, if you can redefine the concept of, the liberal arts, in a way it's including the engineering, computer science, and the other science fields. So in a way that we all included in a way to glorify God's names, God's kingdom.
There is an instinctual reaction among folks that the liberal arts is the humanities.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's much too limiting, and it certainly was not the original concept either.
Yeah. So what you're saying about the original concept is liberating to lead the world. It's a very nice way to put together.
But it's important. So,
I'm done.
okay. I think it's important to clarify still, because I don't have a problem with people having their definition of the liberal arts. I think we have a problem when people have different definitions of liberal arts and we're not talking about it. Because then we are functioning at different levels, and that creates confusion. That's what I'm talking about, also going back to what Roger was saying, that we just need to say, hey, let's look at where we have been so that we can understand where we are today, and then together we can see how we can be looking forward to the future. Because I have a sense that there was an attempt through CPLA a few years ago to redefine who we are and our liberal arts perspective and all that. But it created so much misunderstanding. Humanities, yes, but even if we want to expand it, historically it was mostly humanities and sciences, liberal arts. So we get to all the other aspects, we have to say this is an application of the liberal arts. So now if we are at a point where we need to redefine things, then let's just open the conversation so that people know what we are talking about. I hear our leaders at these universities using the term liberal arts in public, and I know so many faculty don't use the term liberal arts that way. And I know faculty members who use liberal arts in a way that is different than other faculty members.
Right. Yeah.
No, that's what I'm saying. We need to have this conversation to clarify our terminology, and so that we can know what we are, I think, can bring us together and hopefully rediscover the energy that was there from the beginning. You want to be in a place where you feel excited, I'm for this, I want to do this, and so forth.
If we look at our history, it's striking that if you go back around the year 2000. The plurality of our students were education students,
Yeah.
which is an application of the liberal arts. So it's not as though we've gone away from our history.
I think the new emphasis on engineering has great potential. I think it's, we're just getting started, but I think the 10 years will see really strides ahead in bringing the Christian perspective to engineering. Engineering right now is just mushrooming as far as needs for people, and so is nursing, and so is a number of other subjects. But I think the engineering program has great potential.
Another part of the concept we need to talk about is the contemporary world.
Yeah.
And that's
What is changing around us? What are the needs and expectations?
just changing fast.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. It's been an enlightening, certainly are at a crossroads, I think.